Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not with you today, but what you're going to be doing today is you're going to be continuing and finishing our video about Lewis and Clark. I want to remind you that what we've been learning about is how Thomas Jefferson did the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. So he purchases this huge area of North America from France for $15 million. And at that time, the United States was only this area over here, right? So they have all this land now, but they don't know what's out there. What kind of Native Americans are already living there, um, what kind of animals there are, what kind of resources they might want to use. So they decide to hire and pay two explorers, Lewis Clark and Lewis and Clark, and they gather all their supplies and they are taking this long journey into the wilderness in this area to try to find out what's there, create maps, and also see if there is that Northwest Passage. So, that river or waterway that would allow them to send boats all the way through North America. Okay, so have out your questions from about the video that we worked on, and we're going to finish those today. You should have up to number 6 done. So let's go over to the movie, and the question that you're looking for now is there a Northwest Passage waterway? Yes or no? We're going to find out. Remember also that we just learned at the end of the video yesterday about who was Sacagawea, and I'm going to replay that part quickly just so you can remember.
It was also during that winter when, in February 1805, Lewis would be introduced to two of the Corps of Discovery's most important members, Sacagawea and her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, a French fur trader. Sacagawea, a 16-year-old Shoshone girl, was having difficulty giving birth to her son, and Lewis was summoned to assist her during labor. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Jean-Baptiste. Lewis and Clark convinced Sacagawea and Charbonneau to join them, since they would need interpreters for the future encounter with the Shoshone tribe. Sacagawea and Charbonneau agreed, and as winter came to a close, the expedition departed Fort Mandan to continue west. The 55-foot-long keel boat was no longer needed from this point on, so it was sent back to St. Louis. The detailed reports and specimens collected by Lewis and Clark were shipped to President Jefferson's home in Monticello. Before their departure, the Mandan chiefs informed Lewis and Clark of what lay ahead: a giant waterfall, followed by shining mountains. When the Corps of Discovery left Fort Mandan, they were now entering completely uncharted territory. Lewis and Clark continued to map out new areas as they progressed, as well as documenting new discoveries such as landmarks and rivers. They even encountered massive grizzly bears for the first time when they reached what is now Montana. The Missouri River seemed to go on forever, and the expedition reached an unexpected fork. After a brief debate as to which direction to take, Lewis and Clark decide to go left. Upon reaching the Great Falls, Lewis and Clark knew they went the right way. Here, the Corps encounters the first of their two most physically demanding challenges. There's more than one waterfall, and the Corps will have to find a route around all of them by land. How will they do this while carrying all that equipment? Sergeant Patrick Gass, the expedition's carpenter, is tasked to help the Corps build several carts to carry everything around these waterfalls. Lewis and Clark hoped that this 20-mile portion of the journey would take 2 days. Unfortunately, this part of the journey ended up taking over an exhausting month thanks to cart breakdowns, inclement weather, and rough terrain. The expedition did not yet have any horses, so those carts had to be pushed by hand the entire way. Lewis and Clark's greatest disappointment came in August 1805. Lewis believed that once he reached the Continental Divide, he would find the fabled Northwest Passage and achieve the expedition's primary objective. Lewis instead discovered that there is no waterway, just more mountains. Regardless, time was ticking to reach the Pacific.
I'm going to pause it here for a minute. So I think if you go over to your questions, is there a Northwest Passage waterway? Is there a way to get from one side to the other? What did they say? Write your answer here for number 7. Okay. Our next question is, how did the Shoshone tribe help the expedition?
And the expedition had to press on. On August 13th, the expedition finally made contact with the Shoshone tribe. Unlike the Teton Sioux or the Mandans, the Shoshones were poorer and more oppressed, suffering constant raids from other tribes like the Blackfeet and the Yatsenas. It's commendable that the Shoshones agreed to help the expedition despite not being as wealthy. Here was Sacagawea's time to shine. Lewis and Clark negotiated with a Shoshone chief for the horses they desperately needed to cross the Rocky Mountains, and with Sacagawea's help interpreting, they were successful. Chief One Who Never Walks gave the expedition 29 horses and a mule.
Okay. So again, you're going to look at your questions. How did the Shoshone tribe help the expedition? What did the Shoshone tribe give to Lewis and Clark and all the other people in their expedition? You're going to write your answer here. Okay. Remember, what they gave them is very important because they were carrying all the supplies that they needed in order to survive. So if you have to push all of those supplies by hand, it's going to be extremely difficult, especially going through mountains. So we're going to go to question 9 now. How long did the expedition stay in Fort Clatsop? I think that's how you say it. We're going to watch for that part next, okay?
Sacagawea was even reunited with her long-lost brother, Kamealwait, whom she had not seen since she was kidnapped by the Hidatsas when she was younger. September 1805. Here came the expedition's second greatest challenge, crossing the Bitterroot Mountains using the Lolo Trail. Even with horses and the help of a Shoshone guide, passing through the Bitterroots would not be easy. According to Sergeant Patrick Gass, they were the most terrible mountains that I ever beheld. Through the Bitterroots they went, and along the way they got lost, suffered freezing cold temperatures and frostbite, and nearly starved to death. What they thought would be an easy passage turned out to be an agonizing 11-day, almost 200-mile stretch. Want to add insult to injury? On September the 10th, the expedition was told of a shortcut they didn't know existed. An old Indian trail just above the Great Falls. What would have taken them only 4 to 5 days to cross before took them over 50. One can only imagine how the members of the expedition felt when they found that out. Starving and extremely weakened, the expedition finally made it through the Bitterroots and encountered the Nimipu tribe. Here is another noteworthy moment when the Corps would be saved by a woman. The Nimipu originally considered killing the expedition. However, a Nimipu woman named Watkuwis said they should live, since she was treated kindly by the white folks when she was their captive years ago. Thanks to Watkuwis' intervention, they were spared, and the Corps was allowed to rest and recuperate before continuing. In October 1805, with 5 new dugout canoes, the expedition progressed through the Clearwater River to the Columbia River and noticed another drastic change in terrain. They emerged from desert, grasslands, and dry air to lush forests and dense moisture. Near the end of October, the Corps of Discovery was now less than 200 miles from the Pacific Ocean. Further down the Columbia, seabirds were spotted, and the air began to smell salty. They knew they were close. Lewis and Clark thought they found the Pacific Ocean on November the 7th, but this was another false alarm, instead finding a large bay where inclement weather trapped them for 3 weeks. On November 18th, William Clark was able to leave the campsite, climb up a hill, and finally spot the Pacific Ocean. After all the efforts it took to get there, Lewis and Clark had finally arrived. But there wasn't much time for celebration. The winter of 1805 was fast approaching, and they needed to figure out a place to stay. Instead of Lewis and Clark simply issuing an order, every member of the Corps was given the opportunity to vote on what to do, including Sacagawea and York. The decision was made to stay on the south side of the Columbia River. They spent that winter in Fort Clatsop, where they experienced constant cold rains. At least there was plenty of elk available to eat. The expedition stayed at Fort Clatsop around 5 months, and in March of 1806, it was finally time to head back home.
Okay, so in case you didn't see it, look again to see how long did they stay at this fort, waiting for the winter to pass so that it would be safe for them to go back towards their homes and families.
The expedition stayed at Fort Clatsop around 5 months, and in March of 1806, it was finally time to head back home.
So hopefully you saw that answer. And that was for number 9. Just have 2 more questions. Number 10, how did people welcome the expedition members back? And what is one achievement of the expedition? Okay, just 2 more questions.
The return journey back to the east didn't take anywhere near as long as the trek west. But this time around, the mood was quite different for the expedition. The members of the expedition were irritable and eager to get back home. In May 1806, the Nimipu befriended Lewis and Clark once more, even helping guide them through the Bitterroots while the snows were gone. Near the end of June, the expedition split into 2 groups to probe previously unexplored portions of the Louisiana Territory. Lewis's group took the shortcut they missed earlier to the Great Falls and explored the Marias River, while Clark's group went south to explore the Yellowstone River. An incident occurred on the early morning of July 27th, where 8 members of the Blackfoot tribe attempted to steal some horses and guns from Lewis's party. In the ensuing chaos, 2 Blackfeet were killed, and Lewis had to hasten his return to Clark under possible threat of a Blackfoot war party. Lewis successfully rejoined Clark at the head of the Missouri River, and the expedition was able to make it back to the Mandan villages on August 14th, 1806. At the Mandan villages, Lewis and Clark say farewell to 4 of the Corps' members, including Sacagawea, Charbonneau, and Jean-Baptiste. The captains allowed John Colter to leave to start a new life for himself out west. The expedition speedily made its way down south through the Missouri River, only stopping to briefly pay their respects at the gravesite of Sergeant Charles Floyd. The Lewis and Clark expedition finally returned to St. Louis on September the 23rd, 1806, where their journey first started over 2 years earlier. The Corps of Discovery was given a hero's welcome. Parties and balls were thrown in their honor everywhere they went. Arguably, the most ecstatic person to see them return was President Thomas Jefferson. However, nobody knows exactly what Meriwether Lewis and President Jefferson discussed on that first post-journey meeting. Once everything was said and done, the members of the Corps of Discovery quietly went about their separate ways.
Okay, so notice that they said there was parties and balls, which are like a word for a dance. So they were treated as heroes and they were welcomed back with parties. It was a big deal when they came back. They were gone for 2 years. Imagine being away from your home, all of your family and friends for 2 years, and they did not know if they would come back safely or if they would die on the journey. Last question. What is one achievement? What is one thing that the expedition was able to do, an accomplishment that they had?
John Coulter stumbled across the area of what is known today as Yellowstone Park. Clark lived the rest of his life in St. Louis, serving as the government's Indian agent in the West. York was eventually freed by Clark and became a wealthy freight business owner. For Sacagawea, some reports say she died of typhus in 1812, but some Native American oral histories say she lived for many more years among the Shoshone, instead dying in 1884. Sadly, Meriwether Lewis died under mysterious circumstances in 1809. Some accounts say he was murdered, while others deemed his death a suicide. The cause of Lewis's death remains disputed to this day. So did the U.S. get its money's worth with the Louisiana Purchase? Absolutely. While Lewis and Clark did not find the Northwest Passage, the vast influx of topographical and scientific data brought back by the Corps more than made up for it. The expedition had traveled over 8,000 miles, established peaceful relations with many Native American tribes, and identified over 120 species of animals and over 200 species of plants. The people most affected by the Corps of Discovery.
I'm going to go back a tiny bit so you can see that list. Okay. So what I want you to do is pick at least one achievement here to write down. These are all the different things that Lewis and Clark expedition were able to do. So they got topographical data, that is information about the land. They traveled more than 8,000 miles. They established relationships, or they got to know many Native American tribes. And they learned of over 120 species of animals and over 200 species of plants. So choose one of those to write down. If you need to pause the video right now, you can could do that. But choose one of those to write down for question 11. And remember that they did not find a Northwest Passage. They were hoping to do that, but it does not exist. But they were able to do all of these other things. And that was why they're considered heroes and why we still talk about them today, because what they did led to a lot of information for the United States government and people. And then that's going to lead to several changes that happen after their expedition, which we will talk about soon.
20 species of animals and over 200 species of plants. The people most affected by the Corps of Discovery were the Native Americans. For some, the arrival of Lewis and Clark meant new opportunities and economic growth. For others, it marked the beginning of the end, a loss of culture and identity. Lewis and Clark intended the expedition to be a mission of peace, to establish a serene coexistence between the United States and its indigenous peoples. Many of the promises made by Lewis and Clark are viewed today as hollow, since those Jeffersonian promises were ultimately not honored. Still, that was through no fault of Lewis and Clark themselves. The Lewis and Clark expedition represents a true American tale, opening up the West for future generations.
The work we are now doing is, I trust, done for posterity in such a way that they need not repeat it. We shall delineate with correctness the great arteries of this country. Those who come after us will fill up the canvas we begin.
All right, so that is the video. Hopefully you were able to write down your answers for all of the questions. I will have you turn those in to me on Monday. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have more time left in class, I'm going to post a link to a Kahoot that you can do on your own, not as a whole class. You could work with someone that's sitting next to you, but you are staying in your seats. And it's just one that you do on your own with some questions about Lewis and Clark and our vocabulary words that we learned this week. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on Monday.